The scorching Pacific sun beats down mercilessly on the steel deck of the USS Helena as it cuts through the choppy waters near Guadalcanal, August 1943. The metallic taste of fear mingles with salt spray as Seaman First Class Johnny Martinez grips the rail, his knuckles white against the rust-stained metal. The distant rumble of Japanese artillery echoes across the Solomon Islands like thunder that never stops. Below deck, the suffocating heat reaches 120 degrees. Men stripped to their waists move like ghosts through the corridors, their eyes hollow from months of relentless combat and rationed hope. The sweet memory of home feels like a cruel joke: ice cream parlors on Main Street, cold Coca-Cola on summer evenings, the simple pleasure of a frozen treat that now seems as distant as another lifetime. Lieutenant Commander Frank Morrison stands in the cramped communications room, staring at a classified telegram that arrived 20 minutes ago. His weathered hands tremble slightly as he reads the impossible order again. Operation Frozen Comfort approved. Proceed as directed. The absurdity of it cuts through him like shrapnel. In the middle of the bloodiest campaign in the Pacific, with men dying daily and supplies running dangerously low, someone back in Washington has authorized the most ridiculous military operation in naval history. But Morrison sees something in his men's faces that the Pentagon statisticians missed: a spiritual hunger more devastating than malnutrition. They're not just fighting the Japanese, they're fighting the slow erosion of everything that makes them human. And sometimes, Morrison realizes with growing dread, the most desperate battles require the most desperate solutions. The nightmare began 6 months earlier when Morrison's younger brother Tommy died at Tarawa, his final letter home describing how the men dreamed more about chocolate milkshakes than they did about their sweethearts. Morrison carries that letter in his breast pocket, the paper worn soft from obsessive reading, each word a reminder of promises broken by circumstance beyond any soldier's control. Flashback to Morrison's childhood in Des Moines, Iowa, summer of 1925. He and Tommy racing through sprinkler water to beat the ice cream truck, their mother's laughter echoing from the front porch as vanilla dripped down their chins. "Promise me something, Frankie," 8-year-old Tommy had said, sticky fingers grabbing his older brother's shirt. "Promise we'll always remember what happiness tastes like." Morrison had laughed then, tousling his brother's hair, unable to imagine a world where such a promise would become sacred. Now, as Morrison watches his crew of 300 men slowly surrender pieces of their humanity to the mechanical brutality of war, that childhood promise transforms into something deeper, a moral imperative that defies military logic. Pharmacist's mate Second Class Anthony, Doc, Castellano approaches with the daily casualty report, but stops when he sees Morrison's expression. Doc, a former soda fountain operator from Brooklyn, understands the language of desperation better than most. "Skipper, the men are talking again," Doc says quietly. "Not about going home anymore. They've stopped talking about that entirely. Now they just sit and stare at the water, like they're trying to remember what it felt like to want something sweet." Doc's voice cracks slightly. "Yesterday, Rodriguez asked me if I thought his daughter would recognize him when he gets back. Not if he gets back, if she'd recognize who he's becoming out here." The moral conflict crystallizes in Morrison's mind like ice forming on metal. Military protocol demands he focus solely on combat effectiveness, ammunition supplies, and strategic positioning. But the classified reports crossing his desk tell a different story: Pacific theater suicide rates climbing, men breaking under psychological pressure at unprecedented rates, entire units requesting transfers not because they fear death, but because they fear losing themselves completely. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Washington, a 20-year Navy veteran who survived Pearl Harbor, presents Morrison with an impossible choice disguised as a routine supply request. "Sir, we've got authorization for a special morale operation. Command says we can convert the old LST-342 into something different." Washington's weathered face struggles with the absurdity of what he's about to say. "They want us to build an ice cream factory." The betrayal cuts deep, not from enemies, but from the war itself. These men enlisted to defend democracy, freedom, the American way of life. Instead, they're discovering that survival requires them to abandon everything that made that life worth defending. Morrison sees it in their eyes during chow, mechanically consuming K rations while staring at nothing, their souls as rationed as their food supplies. Seaman Martinez confides in Doc about the recurring nightmare that's plaguing half the crew. They're back home at family barbecues, but they can't taste anything. The food turns to ash in their mouths while their families celebrate around them, oblivious to the fact that the men they welcomed home are hollow shells wearing familiar faces. "What scares me isn't dying out here, Doc," Martinez whispers during night watch. "What scares me is living through this and never being able to enjoy a simple ice cream cone with my kids." The impossible decision tears at Morrison's conscience. Military resources diverted to ice cream production while men die from insufficient medical supplies seems like criminal negligence. Yet the psychological casualty reports suggest something more insidious: an entire generation of American servicemen returning home spiritually dead, unable to reconnect with the simple pleasures that define civilian happiness. Hey everyone watching from around the world. Drop a comment below and let us know what country or city you're watching from. We love connecting with our global audience and learning where our historical stories are reaching. Your international perspectives make these discussions so much richer. Morrison makes his choice not as a naval officer, but as a brother honoring a sacred promise to a dead sibling. He signs the authorization for LST-342's conversion, knowing that military historians will either celebrate this decision as brilliant psychological warfare or condemn it as the most expensive morale booster in naval history. Either way, he's committed to fighting a different kind of war, one for his men's souls. The operation begins at dawn. The conversion of LST-342 into a floating ice cream factory creates immediate fractures within Morrison's command structure. Executive Officer Lieutenant James Hartwell, a Harvard-educated officer from a distinguished military family, confronts Morrison in his quarters with barely controlled fury. "Sir, with all due respect, this is insanity. We're diverting critical resources, refrigeration equipment, electrical power, fresh water supplies, to manufacture dessert while our ammunition stores run critically low." Hartwell's opposition cuts deeper than professional disagreement. It represents a fundamental philosophical divide about what they're fighting for. "My grandfathers served in the Civil War, my father in the Great War," Hartwell continues, his voice tight with generational pride. "They understood that war demands sacrifice, not comfort. This ice cream operation makes us look like spoiled children playing at soldiers." The tension explodes when Chief Engineer Tommy Kowalski, a Polish-American from Detroit whose entire family works in auto manufacturing, sides with Morrison but for entirely different reasons. Kowalski sees the ice cream factory not as morale-boosting, but as engineering innovation under impossible constraints. "Lieutenant, you don't understand what we're building here," Kowalski argues during a heated staff meeting. "This isn't just about ice cream. We're proving American industrial ingenuity can create luxury in hell itself." The shocking betrayal comes from an unexpected source. Radioman First Class William Sparks O'Brien, whom Morrison trusted implicitly, begins secretly transmitting reports to Pacific Fleet Command questioning the operation's military value. O'Brien, whose brother died at Midway due to insufficient ammunition, cannot reconcile watching precious resources transformed into ice cream while other units desperately need supplies. Morrison discovers O'Brien's betrayal during a routine communication check, finding encrypted messages describing the ice cream operation as frivolous waste of taxpayer money and strategic materials. The discovery devastates Morrison more than enemy fire ever could, not because O'Brien opposed the operation, but because he chose deception over honest confrontation. "Sparks," Morrison says quietly, finding O'Brien alone in the radio room at 0200 hours. 23 years I've been in this Navy. I've seen men die for causes they didn't understand, fighting wars that politicians started. But I've never seen men lose their souls while winning battles." Morrison's voice carries the weight of every decision that's brought them to this moment. "You think I don't know this looks crazy? You think I don't understand the cost?" O'Brien's response reveals the deeper conflict tearing at the crew's unity. "Sir, my brother Danny died at Midway because his gun turret jammed, a mechanical failure that could have been prevented with proper maintenance supplies. Now we're manufacturing ice cream while other sailors are dying from preventable equipment failures. How do I explain that to Danny's widow? The moral complexity deepens when Doc Castellano presents Morrison with medical evidence that transforms the entire operation's justification. His makeshift psychological evaluations reveal that 73% of the crew shows early symptoms of what doctors are beginning to recognize as combat fatigue, a condition that manifests not just as fear, but as complete emotional shutdown. "Skipper, these men aren't just tired," Doc explains, spreading handwritten charts across Morrison's desk. "They're forgetting how to feel joy, how to experience simple pleasures. Without that, they'll never successfully reintegrate into civilian life." The ice cream factory becomes operational on September 15, 1943, producing 500 gallons of vanilla ice cream in its first day. The crew's initial reaction reveals the psychological devastation that military reports never captured. When Seaman Martinez takes his first taste, he breaks down completely, not from happiness, but from grief for everything the war has stolen from him. "I can barely remember what this used to mean to me," he whispers to Doc, tears streaming down his face. Chief Washington organizes distribution protocols with military precision, but even he struggles with the emotional weight of what they're witnessing. Men who haven't smiled in months suddenly rediscovering forgotten expressions, others staring at ice cream cones as if they're artifacts from a lost civilization. The psychological impact proves more complex than anyone anticipated. Some men experience euphoric relief, others feel overwhelming guilt for enjoying luxury while comrades suffer. The operation's success creates unexpected tensions with other Pacific Fleet units who request ice cream deliveries. Morrison faces impossible decisions about distribution, which ships deserve morale boosting most. How do you ration hope without creating resentment? Commander Patricia Reynolds of the hospital ship Mercy argues that wounded soldiers need ice cream more than healthy sailors, while Captain David Chin of the destroyer Buchanan contends that men facing daily combat deserve priority. Before we continue this incredible story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit that like button. We're working hard to reach 1,000 subscribers, and your support helps us bring you more fascinating historical content like this. Every subscription keeps these amazing, untold stories alive. The ice cream barge begins operating as a floating embassy of normalcy, visiting different fleet positions throughout the Solomon Islands campaign. But success brings new moral dilemmas. Is it ethical to provide temporary happiness when permanent solutions remain impossible? Are they healing their men's spirits or simply postponing inevitable psychological reckoning? Morrison realizes they're not just fighting the Japanese anymore, they're fighting for the very concept of what makes life worth living. October 12, 1943. The ice cream barge S-342 approaches the contested waters near Bougainville when Japanese torpedo bombers emerge from storm clouds like vengeful spirits. Morrison watches in horror as the first torpedo strikes the starboard hull, sending machinery and dreams alike into twisted wreckage. The irony cuts deeper than shrapnel, America's most absurd military operation dying under enemy fire that doesn't distinguish between ammunition and ice cream. Chief Kowalski screams over the explosion's aftermath. "The refrigeration units are flooding. We're losing everything." But his anguish isn't about mechanical failure. It's about watching 3 months of painstaking work, hope carefully reconstructed spoonful by spoonful, disappearing beneath Pacific waves. The ice cream factory, symbol of humanity's persistence against dehumanizing war, transforms into a sinking monument to futility. The devastating moral choice arrives with brutal simplicity: save the crew or save the ice cream operation. Morrison has exactly 90 seconds before the barge becomes unsalvageable. Around him, men who've rediscovered fragments of their souls face losing them again, this time permanently. Seaman Martinez, covered in blood from flying metal, stumbles toward the damaged freezer units not to save himself, but to rescue containers of vanilla ice cream for wounded sailors who'll never receive them. "Abandon ship," Morrison orders, but half his crew refuses to comply. They've invested too much emotional capital in this impossible dream to watch it sink without a fight. Doc Castellano frantically loads ice cream containers into life rafts while Japanese fighters strafe the water around them. The scene becomes surreal, men dodging machine gun fire to save dessert, treating ice cream with the reverence usually reserved for classified documents or fallen comrades. The shocking revelation arrives through radio intercept. O'Brien's secret reports to Pacific Command weren't betrayal, but protection. His unauthorized communications convinced Fleet Admiral Nimitz to authorize emergency support for the ice cream operation, recognizing its strategic psychological value. As LST-342 lists dangerously to port, 3 destroyers appear on the horizon, not coincidentally, but because O'Brien's treachery was actually desperate advocacy for his shipmates' mental health. Lieutenant Hartwell makes the most devastating decision of his military career, choosing to remain aboard the sinking barge to manually operate emergency pumps. His Harvard education and family military traditions suddenly seem irrelevant compared to preserving something his grandfather's generation never understood: the psychological equipment necessary for modern warfare. "I was wrong, Skipper," he shouts over rushing water. "This isn't about ice cream, it's about remembering why we're fighting in the first place." The rescue operation becomes a microcosm of everything the ice cream barge represented. Impossible logistics serving human dignity. Chief Washington coordinates ice cream transfer to arriving destroyers with the same precision he'd use for ammunition transfer, because he finally understands they're both essential weapons. Men form human chains passing ice cream containers hand to hand while under sporadic enemy fire, their actions defying every principle of military efficiency except the most important one, preserving their capacity for joy. Morrison faces his ultimate test when the barge's captain goes down with his ship tradition conflicts with his responsibility to preserve the ice cream operation's legacy. Standing waist-deep in frigid water, he must choose between personal honor and continuing a mission that's proven its strategic value through the very fact that men are willing to die protecting it. The decision tears at everything he believes about leadership, sacrifice, and the relative importance of symbols versus substance. The final Japanese attack comes as the last ice cream containers reach safety. 0 fighters dive through anti-aircraft fire, targeting not the warships, but the defenseless life rafts carrying ice cream supplies. The enemy's focus on destroying dessert rather than strategic targets proves the operation's psychological warfare success. Even Japanese commanders recognize that American morale represents a legitimate military threat worth eliminating. As LST-342 disappears beneath the waves, Morrison realizes the devastating truth: the ice cream barge's destruction creates more powerful symbolism than its operation ever could. News of sailors dying to protect ice cream for their comrades spreads throughout the Pacific Fleet faster than any official communication. The story transforms from absurd waste to sacred sacrifice, proving that in total warfare, the battle for human dignity becomes as crucial as the battle for strategic objectives. The survivors, pulled from shark-infested waters still clutching melted ice cream containers, represent something unprecedented in military history: soldiers who fought not just for victory, but for the right to remain human during inhuman circumstances. Their rescue becomes legend not because they survived enemy attack, but because they chose to risk everything for something that reminded them why survival mattered. Morrison, the last man pulled from the water, carries only one item: Tommy's final letter, now salt-stained but still readable, a brother's promise finally kept under the most impossible circumstances imaginable. 6 months after the ice cream barge sinking, Morrison sits in a San Diego naval hospital, his hands still trembling from what doctors euphemistically call battle fatigue. The irony isn't lost on him. The man who tried to heal his crew's psychological wounds now battles his own demons. Every night, he dreams of vanilla ice cream dissolving into bloody seawater, sweetness transformed into salt, and regret. The guilt consumes him. Did his impossible mission save souls or destroy them more completely? Doc Castellano visits Morrison religiously, bringing reports from Pacific Fleet units that received ice cream deliveries before the barge's destruction. The psychological impact data contradicts everything military medicine predicted. Sailors who experienced even brief ice cream distribution show 40% lower rates of combat fatigue, 60% higher reenlistment intentions, and most significantly, 80% better post-war civilian reintegration scores. Skipper, Doc explains, spreading medical charts across Morrison's bed, we weren't just making ice cream. We were manufacturing hope. But the healing comes with devastating costs. Chief Kowalski, pulled from the Pacific waters clutching a wrench and frostbitten ice cream containers, suffers complete emotional breakdown when he realizes the factory he built with such pride exists now only in memory. His engineering genius, once focused on creating joy under impossible circumstances, turns obsessive and destructive. He spends 18-hour days in the hospital workshop, building increasingly elaborate but pointless mechanical devices, trying to recreate something that can never be rebuilt. Seaman Martinez experiences the cruelest aftermath of all. The ice cream operation restored his capacity for joy just long enough for him to remember what the war stole from him. Now, every sweet taste triggers panic attacks as his mind associates pleasure with impending loss. His wife writes from California describing their son's first birthday party, complete with ice cream cake, and Martinez breaks down reading it, not from homesickness, but from terror that he'll never again be capable of simple family happiness. The reconciliation begins unexpectedly when O'Brien appears at Morrison's bedside, carrying a stack of commendations and a burden of his own guilt. "Sir, I need you to understand something," O'Brien says, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "Those reports I sent weren't betrayal, they were desperation. I watched my shipmates dying spiritually, and I knew if Fleet Command understood what we were really fighting for, they'd support us completely." O'Brien reveals the larger truth that transforms Morrison's understanding of the entire operation. Pacific Command had been secretly monitoring morale collapse across all theater units. The ice cream barge wasn't an isolated experiment, but part of a classified psychological warfare initiative involving floating libraries, mobile movie theaters, and even a traveling jazz band. "We weren't the only ones trying to save our men's humanity, Skipper. We were just the most visible failure." The devastating revelation comes through classified documents O'Brien smuggled from Fleet Intelligence. Japanese forces specifically targeted morale-boosting operations because their own psychological warfare analysis concluded that American spiritual collapse posed a greater strategic threat than military defeat. Enemy commanders recognized that soldiers who retained emotional connections to home fought more effectively, took fewer unnecessary risks, and showed superior battlefield decision-making under pressure. Lieutenant Hartwell, recovering from severe injuries sustained during the barge evacuation, provides the most profound insight into the operation's true legacy. His Harvard education and family military tradition, once sources of rigid opposition, now inform a deeper understanding of warfare's psychological dimensions. "My grandfather fought at Gettysburg," Hartwell explains during a group therapy session. "He used to say the hardest part wasn't facing Confederate guns, it was remembering why preserving the Union mattered. We weren't making ice cream, gentlemen. We were preserving civilization." The healing process reveals itself in unexpected ways. Chief Washington, transferred to stateside duty training new recruits, incorporates ice cream socials into boot camp protocols. Initially ridiculed by senior officers, these events prove remarkably effective at building unit cohesion and reducing training-related psychological casualties. Washington's innovation spreads throughout training commands, transforming from wartime desperation into peacetime policy. Doc Castellano's medical research on the ice cream operation's psychological impact becomes foundational literature for what will eventually be called post-traumatic stress treatment. His detailed observations of how simple pleasures can anchor traumatized minds to positive memories pioneer therapeutic approaches that save thousands of veterans' lives in subsequent decades. "We proved something important," Doc writes in his official report. "Human beings can't survive on military efficiency alone. They need reminders of what they're fighting to preserve." The redemption Morrison seeks comes through letters from Pacific Fleet sailors who never met him but heard the ice cream barge story. A submarine crew in the Mariana Islands writes describing how they've started sharing single ice cream bars among 40 men, each sailor taking one small bite and passing it on, a communion ritual honoring the memory of men who died protecting dessert. A bomber squadron in the Philippines names their aircraft Sweet Dreams. carrying the ice cream barge's legacy into combat over Japan itself. The most profound transformation occurs within Morrison himself. The brother's promise that haunted him throughout the war evolves from burden into mission. He establishes a foundation dedicated to studying the psychological needs of combat veterans, funded partly by his own Navy pension and partly by donations from survivors of Pacific Theater operations. The Foundation's first research project, documenting how small luxuries, ice cream, music, familiar foods, can serve as psychological anchors preventing complete spiritual collapse. Morrison's final reconciliation comes through understanding that the ice cream barge's destruction was never failure, but completion. The operation's true purpose wasn't producing dessert, but proving that American servicemen would risk everything to preserve their capacity for simple joy. That willingness to fight for humanity rather than just victory became the Pacific War's most powerful psychological weapon, one that Japanese forces never successfully countered. 20 years later, Morrison stands at the USS Arizona Memorial, reading names of Pearl Harbor casualties including his brother Tommy. In his pocket, he carries not Tommy's final letter, but a photograph from the ice cream barge's last day, sailors laughing over vanilla ice cream while enemy planes approached on the horizon. The image captures everything America was fighting for, the right to find sweetness even in the middle of hell, the determination to preserve joy against overwhelming darkness. The ice cream barge operation becomes legend not because it succeeded, but because it represented the most essential truth of American warfare, the belief that freedom includes the freedom to be happy, even when happiness seems impossible. Morrison's impossible mission proved that sometimes the most ridiculous military operations serve the most serious strategic purposes. The legacy of LS-342 transcends military history, becoming a testament to humanity's refusal to surrender joy even in war's darkest moments. Morrison's impossible mission proved that preserving the capacity for simple pleasures, ice cream shared among brothers in arms, represents the deepest form of resistance against forces that would strip away human dignity. The men who died protecting vanilla ice cream in shark-infested waters weren't fighting for dessert. They were fighting for the radical idea that even warriors deserve sweetness, that civilization's true strength lies not in its weapons but in its willingness to create beauty amid destruction. Their sacrifice reminds us that sometimes the most profound victories come from defending seemingly trivial things that make life worth living. Today, when we face our own impossible circumstances, Morrison's story challenges us to ask, what simple joys are we willing to fight for? What sweetness will we protect when the world seems bitter beyond redemption? If you found this incredible true story as moving as we did, please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more untold tales of courage, sacrifice, and the human spirit during history's darkest hours. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder that hope can survive anything, even war. What historical story of unexpected heroism would you like us to explore next? Let us know in the comments below.